The billionaire slid a contract across the table and said, "Marry me for 6 months, and your father gets the surgery he needs." I stared at the number on the contract. $5 million. Enough to save my father. Enough to destroy my pride. And possibly enough to make me fall in love with the one man I had promised myself I would never trust. His name was Adrian Vale. And 3 months after I signed that contract, I discovered he had known something about my father that could change everything. My father had never asked me for money. That was what made his diagnosis so painful. He was the kind of man who would rather repair an old refrigerator 3 times than admit he couldn't afford a new one. He had raised me alone after my mother died, working long shifts as a mechanic outside Chicago while making sure I never felt poor. Then one rainy Tuesday, I found him sitting on the kitchen floor. He was conscious, but barely. At the hospital, the doctor explained that his heart condition had become dangerously advanced. He needed an operation soon. There was only one problem. Insurance would cover part of it. The rest would cost more than I could earn in several years. I was 28, working 2 jobs, and already behind on rent. That night, I sat beside my father's hospital bed while he slept. "Don't worry about me," he whispered without opening his eyes. I forced a smile. "I'm not worried." He opened one eye. "You've been a terrible liar since you were 6. I laughed, but tears filled my eyes. Then my phone rang. It was my employer. I had been fired from my second job. That was when I realized I had run out of options. 2 days later, an unfamiliar woman approached me outside the hospital. She wore a black coat and carried a leather folder. "My name is Claire Morgan. I represent Adrian Vale." I almost walked away. Everyone knew Adrian Vale. At 35, he had built a technology company worth billions. He owned luxury hotels, private aircraft, and enough property to make newspapers obsessed with his every move. He was also known for one thing: he never married. "What does he want from me?" I asked. Claire handed me an invitation. "A meeting." "I don't know him." "He knows you." That sentence made me stop. The meeting took place that evening in a quiet restaurant overlooking the city. Adrian was sitting alone. He wasn't what I expected. No flashy watch, no arrogant smile, just a dark suit, tired eyes, and a cup of untouched coffee. He stood when I approached. "Emma Carter?" "Yes." "Please sit." "Oh." I remained standing. "If this is about a donation, I can't repay you." "I'm not offering a donation." He pushed the contract toward me. I read the first page, then the second. My stomach tightened. "You want me to marry you?" "For 6 months. And in exchange, you'll pay for my father's surgery?" "Yes. I stared at him. "Why?" His expression didn't change. "Because I need a wife." "That doesn't explain why me." For the first time, something shifted in his eyes. "Because you're the only woman I've met who wouldn't marry me for my money." I almost laughed. "You're asking me to marry you because I'm desperate enough to accept your money." "No," he said quietly. "I'm asking because you need something I can give you, and I need something you can give me." "What?" "A reason for my grandfather to stop trying to control my life." Apparently, Adrian's grandfather had placed a condition on his inheritance. Adrian needed to be married before his 36th birthday to maintain control of the family trust. He wanted a temporary marriage. I needed my father alive. It was cold, transactional, and humiliating. But then Adrian said something that changed my mind. "Your father doesn't have to know why you're doing this." I looked at him. Why not? Because if he knew his daughter sold her future to save him, he'd refuse the operation. That was exactly what my father would do. The next morning I signed. My father's surgery was scheduled within days, and Adrian kept his promise. But living with him was nothing like I expected. Our marriage began with rules: separate bedrooms, no questions about the past, no public arguments, no falling in love. That last rule almost made me smile, as if love could be prevented by putting it in a contract. For the first few weeks, Adrian barely spoke to me. Then small things began to happen. One night, I came home from the hospital and found dinner waiting. "I didn't ask for this," I said. "You haven't eaten since breakfast." "How do you know?" "Your assistant told my assistant." I stared at him. "You have assistants monitoring my meals?" "No." He paused. I asked. I smiled despite myself. Another night I found him in the kitchen at midnight. He was trying to make pancakes. "You're a billionaire," I said. He looked at the burned pan. "Apparently money can't buy cooking skills." I laughed, and Adrian smiled. It was the first real smile I'd seen from him. That was the moment something changed. Not love. Not yet. But curiosity. I started seeing the man behind the billionaire. He hated crowded rooms. He kept an old photograph of his mother hidden inside a desk drawer. He never talked about his father, and whenever someone mentioned his family, his entire expression became guarded. Then one evening, I found him sitting alone on the balcony. "Can't sleep?" I asked. "No." "Why?" He looked toward the city. "My father died believing I betrayed him." I sat beside him. "Did you?" "No." He didn't explain. I didn't push. That night he finally told me about his father. Years earlier, Adrian's father had discovered financial fraud inside the family company. Before he could expose it, he died in what authorities called an accident. Adrian had always suspected otherwise, but he had never found proof. Then he looked at me. "You should stay away from my family." "Why?" "Because people around me get hurt." I wanted to tell him I wasn't afraid, but I remembered the contract. We weren't supposed to care. Except we already did. My father's surgery went well. He was recovering. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine a future. Then Adrian's cousin, Marcus, showed up at the hospital. He smiled politely. "You're Emma, aren't you?" "Yes." "Adrian's wife." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. Then he leaned closer. "Do you know why Adrian really chose you?" My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" Marcus smiled. "Ask him about your father." I went home that night with a terrible feeling. Adrian was in his office. I walked in without knocking. "What do you know about my father?" He froze. That was my answer. "You knew him." "Emma, you knew my father before you met me." He stood. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" He reached for me. I stepped back. And then he finally told me. My father had once worked as a mechanic for Adrian's family, but he hadn't just repaired their cars. Years ago, Adrian's father had trusted him with evidence connected to the company's fraud. My father had hidden the evidence after Adrian's father died, and that evidence had disappeared. Adrian had spent years trying to find it. "Did you marry me because of him?" I whispered. Adrian didn't answer immediately. That silence destroyed me. "So this was never about needing a wife." It was both. Both? I needed the marriage, Emma. But when I learned who your father was, I needed to know where the evidence went. I felt sick. You used me. At first, yes. The honesty hurt more than a lie. I took off my wedding ring. You should have told me. I was going to. When? He looked at the ring in my hand. When I knew I could protect you. From who? Adrian's face changed. Marcus. That name made me stop. Adrian opened a drawer and removed a small envelope. Inside was an old photograph. My father stood beside Adrian's father, and behind them was Marcus. On the back, my father's handwriting said, "He knows where the money went." My hands started shaking. Then Adrian said the words I wasn't prepared to hear. Your father's medical records were altered. I stared at him. What? The hospital originally classified his condition as treatable. Someone changed the report to make the surgery appear more urgent. Why would anyone do that? To pressure your father. My father's eyes, his refusal to tell me anything, the sudden diagnosis, the impossible financial burden. It all came crashing together. Adrian continued. Someone wanted him desperate enough to reveal what he knew. And you? I discovered it too late. Said. I looked at him. Did you arrange my father's surgery to save him? Yes. Why? His voice became quieter. Because by then, I wasn't doing it for the evidence. I couldn't breathe. Then why? He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Because I couldn't lose the woman I'd fallen in love with. Everything went silent. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to leave. But I also knew the man standing in front of me was no longer the stranger who had offered me a contract. He was the man who waited outside my father's hospital room all night, the man who remembered how I took my coffee, the man who had learned to make pancakes because I once said they reminded me of home. Still, love couldn't erase betrayal. So I left. For 3 weeks I stayed with my father. Adrian never came after me. He didn't call. He didn't send flowers. He respected the one thing I'd asked for. Space. Then one morning my father called me into his room. He was holding the old photograph. Where did you get this? Adrian gave it to me. My father closed his eyes. Then he finally confessed. He had hidden the evidence for 20 years. Not to protect Adrian, to protect me. He had discovered that Marcus had been stealing money from the company and had threatened to hurt me if my father spoke. My father had stayed silent. But there was one thing Marcus didn't know. My father had made a digital copy of everything, and he still had it. That afternoon, Adrian arrived. My father looked at him. You're late. Adrian stopped. Sir? My father handed him a small drive. Your father deserved better than what happened to him. Adrian stared at it, then at my father. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were angry, my father said, and angry men make dangerous decisions. Adrian looked at me. I made plenty of those. I crossed my arms. You did. Dad. He nodded. I can't undo what I did to you. No. But I can stop asking you to forgive me. That was when I realized Adrian wasn't there to reclaim the marriage. He was there to give me a choice. He placed the divorce papers on the table. I signed them. I stared at the papers, then at him. That's it? No. He reached into his pocket and removed my wedding ring. You left this behind. He placed it beside the papers. I thought you might want it back. I picked it up. For months, I'd believed I had married Adrian to save my father, but somewhere between hospital corridors, burned pancakes, midnight conversations, and the secrets we'd uncovered together, I had fallen in love with him. Not because he was a billionaire, not because he saved my father's life, but because beneath all that money was a lonely man who had finally learned that love couldn't be bought, negotiated, or controlled. Adrian. He looked up. I don't want the divorce. His eyes widened. Emma, you don't have to stay because of my money. I know. Or because of your father. I know. Then why? I smiled through my tears. Because I finally figured out what the contract got wrong. What? You were never supposed to be the thing that saved my father. Adrian stared at me. You were the man who made me believe I could stop living out of fear. For once, the billionaire had no answer. He simply took my hand. Months later, Marcus was arrested after the evidence exposed years of fraud. My father recovered, and Adrian and I had a second wedding. No contract, no inheritance clause, no conditions, just two people standing in front of the people they loved. Before we exchanged rings, Adrian leaned toward me. You know, technically you did marry me for my money. I raised an eyebrow. I married you because I needed $5 million. He smiled. And now? I looked at him. Now I need you. His smile disappeared. Not because he was unhappy, because those 3 words meant more to him than every billion he had ever earned. And as I slipped the ring onto his finger, I realized something. Sometimes we enter someone's life because we're desperate. Sometimes we stay because we're afraid. But every once in a while, the person we thought we were using to survive becomes the person who teaches us how to live. I had fallen for a billionaire to save my father. In the end, I discovered that the greatest thing he ever gave me wasn't money. It was the courage to choose love when I no longer needed to be saved. Would you have married someone you didn't love to save the life of someone you couldn't live without? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Tale Viora for more emotional stories about love, sacrifice, secrets, and second chances. Sometimes, the most unexpected person becomes the one we were meant to find.